Before we get started, I do want to say that I have bats on my face. I feel like it's not translating on camera, so I just had to show you guys. It's freaking bats.
It's time for the 13 Nights of Saraween.
Hey besties, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have for you a recommendation video. I have not done a dedicated recommendation video in a very long time, but because it's spooky season and I'm doing the 13 Nights of Saraween, I thought it was a very fitting time to do a thriller recommendations for you. So today I have 15 thriller books for you that I think you'll really enjoy if you have similar reading tastes to me at all. I tend to really enjoy thrillers that have a lot of plot twists, that have a lot of psychological drama, maybe they're a little fucked up. Those tend to be the things that I look for in thrillers. So let's just go ahead and get into the list. So the first book on this list is True Crime by Joseph Knox. So this book is extremely meta because it's written from the perspective of Joseph Knox as a true crime writer. So he's writing about like a fictional version of himself. So in the book, he's very good friends with a woman named Evelyn, who is also a writer. And so she is very fascinated by this case of this girl who went missing 7 years prior. And so she has kind of dedicated all of her time and energy into trying to find out what happened to this girl. She has all these different recordings of like interviews and research that she's done. And so she goes to Joseph and she says, hey, can you review the stuff that I've been writing so far? And initially he's like, this story's not interesting. The girl didn't die. She's just missing. Nobody wants to hear about this. Everybody just prefers true crime with a body. He goes ahead and he starts reading her manuscript and he starts reading all of her research and whatever, and he discovers that she's really onto something. And so the book is written through his perspective, but using a lot of her writing. And so like I said, Joseph Knox actually writes himself into the story, so it's extremely meta, to the point where I was about halfway through the book and I was like, wait, is this real? Is this a real story? Did this actually happen to Joseph Knox? I'm so confused. And so I had to Google it, and then I realized that it's just meant to be very meta. I highly recommend you listen to the audiobook version of this because each and every character has their own voice actor, and because it's written sort of in transcript form of all of Evelyn's like case files together and then letters between Joseph and Evelyn, I don't really know how that would translate without listening to people telling the story, if that makes any sense. But it's so good. It's so addicting. I really loved all the twists and turns in this. I think I read it literally in one day. I think I just like started listening to it on a whim. I think I got it through Libro FM, and then I went crazy. Like I had to finish it. I had to know what was going on. And don't get me wrong, it's a little messy. There's twists on twists on twists in this book. It definitely gets a little convoluted, but I really liked it. I tend to like books like that. But so if you like kind of complex thrillers where there's a lot of twists, but they are done well and that they make sense even if they're kind of like red herrings and stuff, I really enjoyed that. This really felt like the Pepe Silva meme where it was just like, what is going on here? The next one on my list is pretty popular among a lot of people, but I still want to recommend it because I loved it so much, and that is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This book is about a group of friends that meet at college, and all throughout college they're super close, they're thick as thieves, but unfortunately right before they graduate one of them gets murdered, and this fractures the friend group, and so as they go into adulthood they grow apart. So now we're 10 years later and they're all attending a college reunion, and one of them decides that he wants to get to the bottom of what happened, so it is a close proximity whodunit, and we have two timelines. We have the timeline of them being at the college reunion as well as them meeting in college and sort of everything that leads up to the murder, and then obviously we get the reveal towards the end. And what I really loved about this book is that our main character Jessica is an extremely unreliable narrator. She gives you bits and pieces sort of out of order. All of the memories of them being in college are also given to you out of order, so I really loved sort of her take on telling you the story. She's also a very unlikable character, which is going to be a hit or miss with most people, but I really liked the way that she was unlikable. Like she just gave you vibes like you didn't quite know when she was telling the truth and when she wasn't, but she was still like giving you the story in a juicy way. I felt like this book was just extremely addictive. At the time that I read it, they actually did not have an audiobook, so I had to physically read it and get it from my library, and you know that this bitch is mostly an audiobook listener, so it was a big deal that I was that compelled to read it, and I read it in 2 sittings. I was so addicted to it. It reminded me of like when I was a kid and I used to stay up at night just like reading. I literally had to force myself to go to bed because I had work the next day. I just loved this so much. I do think it is a divisive book. There are some people who love it and some people who hate it, but if you like a whodunit and you like unreliable narrators and unlikable characters who have a lot of flaws, I really think you'll like this. It's messy, but it is a good time. That leads me into my next book, which is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This is her thriller that she released this year. So in this book, we have our main character, Shay, and when she was in college, she got involved in a cult, and and she just narrowly escapes right before she graduates. But unfortunately, along the way, one of her friends dies by suicide, and it is a really dark thing that happens in her past, so she's really tried to leave it behind. But one day she's listening to a podcast about true crime, and she finds out that her friend Laurel, that was also involved in the cult, has died in a very similar manner to the other friend that died by suicide. And so she decides to go back to upstate New York to try to find out what happened. And the guy who is running the true crime podcast is actually her childhood friend, and so they decide that they're going to solve it together. So they kind of get embroiled in this case of like getting to the bottom of cult happenings. And I really liked this because it's sort of like an exploration on sex and the power of men and the authority that they have over women. It's just really interesting to read from Shay's perspective, because similar to Jessica from In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, she's a little bit unreliable. She gives you information out of order. A lot of her telling stories about what happened in the past is her telling her friend for the podcast and like them doing interviews and recording. And so she's very slowly but surely kind of revealing information to you. So as you're going in it, you're kind of like trying to figure out like how things connect. And then obviously in the present day, we're also dealing with more cult stuff. But I really liked this, and I didn't like it as much as In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, but it was still a really gripping read, and I still read it really quickly and really enjoyed what I read. I will say there's a lot of violence against women, so if that's not your jam, this is probably not going to be the book for you. But overall, I really liked it, and I think that this was a really good second thriller from Ashley Winstead, and I'm really looking forward to more books by her. The next book on my list is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is a very popular book that I feel like a lot of people have read, but I still want to put it on this list because it was such a fun reading experience. Like if you have not gotten your hands on this book, I absolutely recommend it. There's also a movie on Hulu if you want to see the film adaptation. So in this book, we have our main character Darby, who's driving home during a blizzard to try to get to her mother, who's in the hospital. But because of the snowstorm, she actually has to stop at a rest stop. And when she gets to the rest stop, there's a bunch of strangers inside. She doesn't really want to talk to them. She makes a little bit of small talk. And when she goes outside to make a phone call, she ends up seeing that there's a little girl in one of the vans, and she doesn't know whose car it is, but she knows that this little girl is kidnapped because she's obviously like bound and like in a dog cage, and like it's not good vibes. So she's like, I need to find out who the fuck stole this little girl. And so then the rest of the book is a very like action-packed story of her like running around trying to find out of like a way to like save this little girl. It's an adventure. It's a roller coaster, if you will. Like your brain will just be like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? Don't get me wrong, you do have to suspend belief a little bit to read this. There are definitely some parts where I was like, Miss Darby girl, if that happened in real life, you would be dead. But I was here for it. I love an outlandish, crazy ride, and so I had so much fun. I actually don't really like the Hulu adaptation very much. I watched it, and in comparison to the book, I feel like they lost a lot of the magic, but it still seemed fun. I think other people liked it, so if you want to watch the movie, that's cool too. But I really, really recommend it. I also think this would be an amazing book to get you out of a reading slump because it is just so action-packed. Like, action is the best word that I can think of when it comes to this book. Like, it will just take you on a journey. Next up, we have The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentill. This is another very meta book. Something about me is I love a meta thriller. This book is a little bit hard to explain, but essentially, we're following an author who is writing a thriller, and she is submitting excerpts of her book to a friend that is a fellow writer who is giving her critiques. We're reading the bits of her story that she's sending to him with letters between them in between, but the letters that we're reading are only from his perspective. Hopefully you're still following me. So in the manuscript that we're reading, our main character is also in the process of writing a book, and it opens with her being at the Boston Public Library. And so while she's there, she hears a scream in the background. And so everyone in the library is like, oh my god, why was there a scream? But then security comes and they're like, hey, nothing's going on. But through that experience, she ends up befriending some strangers at the library, and so they all sort of form a friend group because they're all very confused and want to get to the bottom of what happened with that scream. So then it's all about them trying to solve what happened, but then the writer character in that story is also writing a story about the scream in the library. Again, extremely meta, extremely confusing. What I really liked about this book is that because we have the letters in between the bits of manuscript, which are only written from the fellow writer's perspective, he has a very eerie and creepy vibe. Like, it sort of starts out very friendly, where they're just sort of like critique partners, and then as it goes on, he seems to have a very like foreboding and weird energy about him. Like, every time she writes something in the story that we're reading that he doesn't like, he gets really angry with her, and then she actually ends up naming naming one of the characters after him, and then they have weird vibes too. And then in the main story that we're reading, there's a lot of like twists and turns, and so I got very invested on many levels. I do feel like I did like a bad job explaining it, but all you need to know is it's like a thriller within a thriller within a thriller. That's the selling point. Like, it's like Inception, but a thriller book, you know what I'm saying? And I really liked this. I think I gave it like 4 stars. So the next book on our list is The Passengers by John Mars. This is a very thrilling book. This is another one that I feel like could get you out of a reading slump. It reads like an episode of Black Mirror. So it is set in the near future where cars are self-driving, and so we have 8 people that get into their vehicles, set their destinations. They think that they're about to go on like just a normal ride where they can relax and the car is going to take them places, but unfortunately a hacker hacks into the system and takes over, and so he starts posting updates on social media and asking people to vote for who will live or die, because all of the cars are going to the same destination and they're going to crash because this hacker has like a point to prove. And so it is kind of a whole race to find out a way to get the cars back from the hacker. And so slowly but surely we see people start getting killed off, and it's just like really high action, really high paced, fast paced, not high paced. That's not a word. What's also really interesting is that all of these people who've been targeted by the hacker have a secret to hide, and so slowly but surely he starts revealing all their secrets, which affects how the public are voting on who they want to live or die. And so it was just so good. I also read this like in a day. I read it during a 24-hour readathon, so obviously I needed to read it in a day, but I was just like so like engrossed by the writing and by how quickly the story was happening. The only caveat that I'll give is that I thought that the ending dragged a little bit. Like, there was one point where I was like, okay, the book's over, and then there was still like a bunch more chapters, and I was like, why is the story doing this? So there was some like twists during the end where I was like, I don't think this needed to happen, but overall it's still very high paced. I also highly recommend the audiobook for this because it is written with like news excerpts in between things, so you hear like sound effects and the news reporters kind of reporting on what's going on. You also hear from the hacker. It's so interesting, so I really would recommend that if you like audiobooks. But overall it was just a really fun read. Okay, my camera just died while I was in the middle of explaining the next book, so I'm sorry if the lighting or position of the camera or anything has changed, but let's just move on to the next book. Next we have The One by John Mars. This is another banger from my guy John. He knows how to do them. I would love to read his entire backlist, but these are the only 2 books that I have read. So The One is also set in the near future. I actually think it is in the same world as The Passengers, and this one takes place before The Passengers. So in this book, scientists have created a DNA test that will match you to your soulmate. The biggest catch to this test is that there's no promising who you'll get matched with. So for example, if you were to take this test with your current partner, and let's say that you're married, you guys might not end up getting matched together, and it will match you to someone random. Or for example, if you are a like 75-year-old person, you might get matched with a 25-year-old. You might get matched with a gender that you have not previously been attracted to. There's a lot of just different scenarios that can happen. And so because of this DNA test has really mixed views from the public. Some people hate it, some people love it, some people are success stories, some people feel like it ruined their lives. And so there's a lot riding on this test. So from my memory, we have one girl who her partner is all the way in Australia, so she's going off to Australia to go find him. We have another person who gets matched with a gender that they're not normally attracted to, and then probably the most exciting plot line is we are following a serial killer and a cop that get matched up, and so they definitely add a lot of the thriller vibes to it. I will say a lot of the other plot lines aren't necessarily thriller. Some of them are even kind of cute and romantic, but the thing is that every character is hiding a secret, so there's definitely a lot of intrigue and mystery surrounding each and every character. And so I really liked this because of just the mix of all the different characters. It felt like it never got stale. Like whenever I was kind of getting bored with one timeline, we would switch perspectives and then we would like go back to that story later. And so I feel like I was constantly being kept on my toes because sometimes there'd be like a cliffhanger on one person's chapter, but then we'd go to a different chapter. And so I just was really enjoying it. And then I also, like I said, enjoyed the perspective of the serial killer being matched with the cop. It was very like cat and mouse, but the police officer didn't even realize because she didn't even know that she was paired with a serial killer. But I really liked that a lot. And so overall, I definitely would recommend both of John Mars' books. I think they both just have a similar vibe where they are just so quick and easy to read. Like they're not like, oh my god, this is the most fantastic literature that I've ever read in my entire life, but overall like the writing style and the characters just will like like drive you to keep going, and you'll want to read it in just like 1 or 2 sittings. So yeah, the one is also very good, so I recommend reading that for sure. The next book on my list is one that I have had as a favorite for so many years. I literally have it up on my bookshelf, and that is Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. I actually feel like this is one of my first like adult thriller reading experiences that I ever had. I think I read it in like 2017. I do want to forewarn when recommending Karin Slaughter that her books have a lot of violence against women, and they're quite graphic. So there are some scenes that my brain has never forgotten. Like I remember in great detail description of a dead body that she put in there. So if any of that makes you queasy or you're not comfortable with that, I highly do not recommend reading Karin Slaughter. So this book follows 2 sisters, Claire and Lydia, and 20 years ago their sister Julia went missing and no one ever found out what happened to them. So the book opens with Claire going out to dinner with her husband, and he ends up getting mugged and then murdered. And so at this point in time, 20 years later, Claire and Lydia are estranged, but after Claire's husband is murdered, they reconnect, and through a series of events they start to uncover some secrets, some things that people have been hiding, and they sort of rekindle their relationship as sisters. And it's just so suspenseful. Like I said, it's very gory, but I loved all the twists and turns of this. I specifically remember the feelings and thoughts I was having when this huge twist happens, to the point where like I could recite to you everything that happens in this book, and I have not reread it since the first time in 2017. Like, this book was iconic. It really left an impact on me. I feel like it really set the tone for what kind of thrillers that I enjoy. This definitely falls into the category of fucked up, but overall I loved it so much, and I really enjoyed it, and it just kind of set me on a path of loving Karin Slaughter. The next book on my list is, you guessed it, another Karin Slaughter book. She's honestly one of my faves. I think I've read 4 Karin Slaughter books, but these 2 are definitely by far my favorite. I do need to read more of her backlist because she has so many books, but again, these are the ones that I like that I'm recommending. But this one is The Good Daughter. This also follows 2 sisters. Something about Miss Karin is she's going to write about a sisterly relationship. So 28 years ago, these sisters, Charlotte and Samantha, are brutally attacked in their home, and their mother ends up getting murdered. Their father is a lawyer who works with kind of like shady people with shady dealings. So as a result of this attack, Samantha actually ends up being injured to the point of being blind. I can't fully remember if she is 100% blind or just partially blind, but because of this, there is a weird relationship between Charlotte and Samantha because of Samantha being the one that gets injured. So over time, now like 28 years later, they are also estranged. There's also a theme of estranged sisters in Karin Slaughter's books. Samantha moves on with her life and she lives far away from home, but Charlotte actually stays in their hometown and becomes a lawyer, following in her dad's footsteps. One day when Charlotte is at the local high school, she actually ends up witnessing a school shooting, and so because of that, all of the family history and everything surrounding her as a person starts to come back up, and I believe that Samantha comes back to town as well, and so then they like work together to sort of solve what's going on. It's a very interesting juxtaposition between the school shooting and present day, and also the attack that happened on them all those years ago. So it's a really good book overall. I didn't like it as much as Pretty Girls. I would say Pretty Girls is absolutely my favorite by far, but The Good Daughter was still really good. Again, I would caution if you don't like extreme violence. Obviously there's a school shooting in it. There's a lot of like triggering content in it, but it was just like, it kept me on my toes. And something I love about Karin Slaughter's books is that the character development is so good, because I feel like often when you read a genre like thrillers, you don't always like get the ins and outs of a character, and they're not always like super fleshed out, but I feel like Karin Slaughter makes her characters feel like real people, and so this was just like chef's kiss, so good. The next book on my list is Confessions by Kanae Minato. This is a thriller that was originally written in Japanese and then translated to English, and it was just so good. There's something about a foreign thriller that just hits. So in this book, we have a teacher whose daughter has recently passed away. She's decided to resign from the school because her daughter actually died on campus, but on her last day, she sits down all of her students and she says, "I know that one of you killed my daughter. They said it was an accident, but one of you did this." And so she proceeds to start telling the story and eventually revealing to everyone in the classroom like who did the murder. And so it was such an iconic way to open the book, because it really gets you like thinking like what's gonna go on. So then after that, we actually switch perspectives a few times throughout the novel as we hear from different characters in the book who are related to this event that has happened. And I feel like that kept the story really fresh, because every time we felt like we had gotten to the bottom of one character, we switched perspectives, and then we were kind of presented with new evidence and new thoughts and feelings about what had gone down. So you sort of see the same story from all these different angles, and then there's a lot of like new things that happen as well after the resignation of the teacher. And so it was just like really interesting. I really enjoyed it. The next book on my list is another foreign thriller, and that is The Good Song by Jeong. This was originally written in Korean and then translated to English. So this is about a character named Yujin who wakes up to the smell of something metallic and a missed call from his brother and his mother asking him if he's okay and where he's been. And so he goes out into his apartment to find his mother's dead body, but he cannot remember what happened the night before, but she is surrounded by blood. It's very obvious that she's been murdered, and he doesn't know if he's the one who did it or if someone broke in and did this. He just has no recollection of what happened. What I really enjoyed about this is that Yujin is not a reliable narrator, not just because of his memory loss, but also because of the way in which he delivers his side of things. So you'll find yourself waffling a lot between whether or not you're on his side, his mother's side, maybe another person's side, and it's just a really intriguing story overall, and I really liked this. The next one on my list is They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. So our main character is a woman named Scarlett who is a college professor, and the twist is that she is a serial killer, but she only kills very bad men. So she specifically is a vengeance killer. She seeks out doling justice to men that have wronged women and don't get punished for it. So for example, she kills someone who sexually assaulted a young girl and then got away with it, and so she kind of just takes everything into her own hands. This school year, things start to get a little bit hairy when the school administration starts to piece together that all these deaths that have been happening that she planned to look like suicides don't really make sense and they're not adding up. So they send a detective to kind of just explore and figure out what's going on, and there's actually a little bit of a romance between Scarlett and the woman that comes to start investigating. Alongside that plot line, we also have a college freshman named Carly. So in juxtaposition to Scarlett, she's more wide-eyed, naive, innocent, and so she is starting to discover just how evil men and everyone around her can be. And so hers is more like an exploration of losing innocence and finding out that people are not quite as good as you think. Overall, this was a lot of fun. I love a book about women getting revenge on men. It was just chef's kiss, so good. The next book on my list is Tinfoil Butterfly by Rachel Eve Moulton. This is probably the weirdest book that I'm going to recommend. This is definitely going to be divisive and a hit or miss for most people because the way the narrative is told is a bit whimsical, if you will. So we open on our main character, Emma. She's hitchhiking across the country trying to outrun her past, and she gets in the car with a man named Lowell. Very quickly, things get dicey, and so she has to steal Lowell's car to get away from him, and so she ends up driving until she runs out of gas and she is in this empty ghost town. And when she goes into an abandoned diner, she actually finds a little boy with a tinfoil butterfly mask, and so they kind of have a standoff, like he steals her gun. It's like a whole thing. And so she starts to find out that this ghost town has some nefarious things going on. There's this man named George who's kind of scary, and he's like hunting down the little boy. There's a lot going on. So what makes this book weird or whimsical is that Emma is kind of telling us the story at her own pace. So we have the current day stuff happening with her and the little boy and her running away from Lowell, but we also have her thinking about all of her stuff and trauma in the past that has led her to this point, but she's very selective about the order in which she gives you that information, so it can be kind of confusing at times. And I would say that the writing style is very flowery, and so there's just definitely times where there's just a lot of like imagery, but not a lot like happening per se. I would definitely say this one isn't as much of a thriller and that there's like something we're trying to solve. There's no mystery. It's more of like a lot of suspenseful things are happening. And so anyway, it was really intriguing, and I just thought that the writing style was so beautiful. It just felt like I could eat it. Like it felt delectable. It was like sweet. It was nectar. I felt like I was being fed. I would say pick this one up if you enjoy sort of whimsical and weird storytelling, if you don't mind kind of meandering to get to the point. The next book on my list is Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel. This is another one that I read quite a long time ago, but it has always stuck with me, and I just always think about it as something to recommend to people. So in this book, we are following two different timelines of the same character, Layne. When she's 15, her mother dies by suicide, and so she is forced to go live in a rural town with her grandparents and her cousin. And then in present day, she's actually returning to the rural town because her cousin has passed away, and so she goes back to the town to sort of like figure out what happened. So something about her mother's side of the family is that all of the women have a dark history of either running away or dying in mysterious ways. This was a fascinating read because it explores the dynamic of a very dysfunctional family, and so we are left just being like, what the fuck, the whole time that you're reading it. There's a lot of very dark things in it, so I would recommend looking at some content warnings for this. I don't really want to say necessarily what some of them are because I do feel like they are spoilers, but overall just know that there's a lot of different like kind of nefarious things that happen with these young girls, with the whole history of them, you know, either running away or dying. It was just done really well, and I loved the exploration of all these different characters, and everyone was just so fucked up, and I really liked it. And then lastly, our final book is Little Secrets by Jennifer Hillier. This is actually a book that I read pretty recently. I think I read it like 2 months ago, and I picked it up so randomly. I found it on Scribd, and I liked the cover, and I was kind of in the mood to read a thriller, and I was like, oh, I'll just put this on. It'll probably not be very good, but it ended up being so good. So the book opens in Seattle at Pike Place Market, and our main character Marin is there with her son. They're walking around. He's a toddler. If you've ever been to Pike Place Market, if you know what it is, it's very crowded there. It's like a lot of like little shops, and it would be very easy for a kid to kind of wander off. And so her little boy keeps asking her to go get a lollipop, and so she gets distracted because her husband like calls her on the phone, and she lets go of her little boy's hand for just a few seconds, and when she finally looks down, he's gone. So we find Marin a year later, very depressed, not living her life the way it used to be, and her marriage is on the rocks. She is still obviously very deep in her grief of losing her son. She feels like it's her fault, and because of that, it's caused a lot of strain on her marriage. Marin finds out that her husband is actually cheating on her, and so she kind of takes this as the last straw. She can't believe he would be doing this after what happened to their son, and so she decides that she's going to get to the bottom of this and almost like seek revenge on him. And so the thriller kind of lies in her addressing this whole cheating scandal, as well as trying to find out what happened to her son. And as the title might suggest, there's a lot of different secrets going on, little secrets if you will, and I really liked this book. I really liked the twist. I remember when I figured out what was going on, like who did what, I was like, Miss Jennifer's Mind, like, oh my god, this was so good. I really highly recommend it, especially if you want something that's just like a good time. I read this in one sitting. I was like, yes. And so I definitely want to read more Jennifer Hillier. I know she has a huge backlist, so I'm really excited to pick up more thrillers by her. But that brings me to the end of this recommendations list. I hope you found at least one book that you'd be interested in reading, and let me know down below if you have any recommendations for me. Thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.